The dining room still smelled like her. Lavender and something warmer underneath it. The cedar from the linen chest she had kept by the window for 31 years. I had not moved anything. I had not been able to. Her reading glasses were still folded on the side table next to the chair she had loved, the wingback one with the faded burgundy upholstery she refused to let me reupholster because she said the worn patches held memory. 3 days. It had been 3 days since I had buried Diane, and I was sitting in that chair, in the quiet of a house that felt like it had forgotten how to breathe, when I heard them. They were in the upstairs bedroom, our bedroom, and my son Nathan's voice came through the ceiling like something being dragged across concrete. "That bracelet is worth at least $40,000. I looked it up." And then my daughter-in-law, Serena, her voice sharper, more surgical. "The Cartier alone is 60. I already spoke to an appraiser." And then my daughter, my own Cassandra, whom I had paid to put through law school. "You two are not touching the jewelry before the estate is properly handled. Half of that is mine by right." By right. I sat very still. I folded my hands in my lap. Outside the window, a cardinal landed on the bare branch of the oak tree Diane had planted 22 years ago, when Cassandra was born. The cardinal looked at me. I looked back, and I felt something that was not anger. It was colder than anger, quieter, and far more patient. It was the feeling of a decision being made. Before I tell you exactly what I discovered in the weeks that followed, and how every single one of them ended up with less than nothing, while I sat on a beach in Sardinia watching the sun go down over water the color of Diane's eyes, let me just say this. They thought they knew what grief did to a man my age. They thought it made him slow. They thought it made him soft. They were catastrophically wrong about every assumption they had ever made about me, and the education they received was one they will carry for the rest of their lives. If you have ever watched someone you love be taken from you, and then watched the people who were supposed to stand beside you turn into strangers in the space of 72 hours, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach ungrateful family members a lesson they will never forget. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 71 years old. I built Caldwell Precision Contracting from a single truck, $11,000 in savings, and a reputation for doing exactly what I said I would do, when I said I would do it, for the price I quoted. No variations, no excuses. 43 years ago, I signed my first contract to pour the foundation for a strip mall in a town most people have never heard of, and I did that job so well that the developer called me the following spring with a project 3 times the size. By the time I was 50, I had 340 employees, projects in 9 states, and a net worth that my accountant described with a kind of reverent understatement as substantial. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this so you understand who these people were dealing with. Diane and I met when we were both 26. She was a school teacher. She drove a 12-year-old Honda, and she spent her weekends volunteering at a literacy program on the east side of the city. She was not impressed by money. She was impressed by character, by how a man treated people who couldn't do anything for him, by whether he kept his word when no one was watching. I spent the better part of 6 months trying to deserve her attention before she finally agreed to go to dinner with me. We were married for 45 years. She died of pancreatic cancer in the fall, 9 weeks from diagnosis to the day I held her hand in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fading flowers. 9 weeks. The cruelty of it was so absolute it felt almost deliberate. The house has been quiet since then in a way that has no name. The silence has a texture. It presses against the walls. I sit in her chair in the evenings and I think about things she said to me over the years, and one of them, the one I kept returning to in those first terrible days, was this. She said, "Harrison, the worst thing you can do to wicked people is to stay calm. Calm makes them nervous, and nervous people always make mistakes." She was right about everything she ever said. She was right about this, too. My son Nathan is 38 years old. I paid for his undergraduate degree at Georgetown and his MBA at Wharton. In total, I spent approximately $480,000 on his education, which I considered an investment in his future and, I will be honest, an investment in the company I hoped he would one day help lead. Nathan is not unintelligent. He has a certain mechanical fluency with financial language. He can read a balance sheet, he understands leverage ratios, he knows how to talk in a boardroom in the way that people who have never actually built anything have been trained to talk in boardrooms. What Nathan lacks is backbone. He has been married to Serena Holloway Caldwell for 11 years. Serena did not come from money. She came from a desperate, clawing relationship with the idea of money, which is an entirely different thing, and in some ways far more dangerous. She was beautiful in a calculated way, the kind of beautiful that costs a great deal to maintain and expects a return on investment. In 11 years, she had never once called me Dad. It was always Harrison, delivered with a slight upward tilt of the chin that was meant to communicate equality, but communicated something closer to contempt. I had paid for their first home, a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb where the school district was rated highly. I gave Nathan a senior position in the company at a salary of $210,000 a year. I put Serena on the company's benefits plan as a dependent and never mentioned it. My daughter, Cassandra, is 34. She is the one I will admit I did not see coming. Cassandra I had believed completely. She was sharp, argumentative in the best sense, the kind of person who would challenge a position not to undermine you, but because she genuinely wanted to find the truth. I paid for 3 years of law school. I co-signed on her first apartment. When she started her practice, I referred every legal matter the company had that fell within her areas of competency. I told everyone I knew that she was the best attorney I had encountered. I meant it. I believe now that she had decided somewhere in the years before Diane's death that proximity to wealth was not the same as wealth, and that when the moment came, she would not make the mistake of being slow. The moment came 72 hours after I buried my wife. What they wanted was Diane's jewelry collection. This was not a small matter. Over 45 years, I had given Diane pieces that told the story of our life together. A Cartier love bracelet on our 10th anniversary, a suite of South Sea pearl pieces I had brought back from a trip to Japan, an emerald and diamond necklace that had belonged to her grandmother and that I had had reset and modernized for her 60th birthday. The collection had been appraised the previous year at approximately $830,000. What Serena and Cassandra were fighting over in my bedroom 3 days after the funeral was a spreadsheet with a $sign attached to it. I heard Nathan say almost inaudibly, "Maybe we should wait." And I heard Serena reply, "Wait for what? For him to give it all to charity? You know how he gets when he starts with the legacy talk." I heard Cassandra say, "The trust documents are clear, Serena. You are not a direct beneficiary. Your husband is." And Serena said something in return that I will not repeat in full, but it included the phrase, "that old man," and the word "senile," and it was said with a confidence that told me she had been thinking it for a long time. I sat in Diane's chair. I did not move. I felt a strange peace descend over me. Not because I was at peace, but because I recognized it for what it was. It was clarity. I should tell you that the jewelry was only the beginning. In the 2 weeks following Diane's death, I hired a private investigator named Robert Sanchez, former FBI Financial Crimes Unit, 22 years of experience, the kind of man who can find a paper trail that has been deliberately buried under 4 layers of shell companies. I had used Robert before on due diligence matters for the business. I trusted him with the kind of absolute confidence you reserve for people who have never once given you a reason to doubt them. I called him the morning after I heard my son in the bedroom. I said 3 words, "I need you." He said, "I'll be there Thursday." What Robert delivered 2.5 weeks later in a roadside diner 40 minutes outside the city, over coffee and a table by the window where neither of us could be approached without seeing it coming, was not what I had expected. I had expected to find that Nathan and Serena had perhaps moved quickly on the question of the jewelry, perhaps consulted an attorney prematurely about the estate. I had expected to find ordinary, petty impatience. What I found instead was a systematic, premeditated, multi-year fraud. It began with the company accounts. Robert laid the first documents on the table with the quiet focus of a man who knows the weight of what he is putting down. Nathan had been using the company's discretionary operating account, an account designed to allow senior management to make rapid purchasing decisions up to $150,000 without a board approval process, to fund personal expenditures for a period of 31 months. In that 31-month period, $2,417,000 had been transferred in increments carefully structured to fall below the threshold that would trigger automatic auditing flags. $49,000 here, $73,000 there. The transfers were routed through a vendor account registered to a company called Holloway Precision Consultants, LLC. Holloway, Serena's maiden name. I held the paper. I looked at the name. I set the paper down, and I picked up my coffee cup. "There's more," Robert said. The second layer was the pension fund. Caldwell Precision had a defined benefit retirement plan covering 187 employees, people who had worked for me for decades, some of them who had been with me since the early years when we were small enough that I knew every single name, every spouse, every child's birthday. Over an 18-month period, Nathan had redirected the company's required pension contributions, a total of $1,690,000, into the same Holloway Precision Consultants account. He had done this by forging my signature on amended plan documents. He had done this while I was watching my wife die. I will tell you what I felt in that moment. I will describe it as precisely as I can. It was as if the floor of the diner became very solid beneath my feet, more solid than it had been before, as though the earth itself had taken a position. "Robert," I said quietly, "is this everything?" "No," he said. He slid a third folder across the table. The third layer involved Cassandra. She had filed 6 weeks before Diane's death, during the weeks when Diane was in hospice and I was sleeping in a chair beside her bed, a petition with the probate court for an emergency guardianship evaluation. The petition claimed that I had exhibited signs of cognitive decline, confusion, and financial incompetence. It cited 2 fabricated incident reports allegedly authored by staff at a medical facility which I had never visited. It cited a letter allegedly from a physician which I had never seen before. If the petition had succeeded, and it had been 2 weeks from a hearing when Diane died, and I unknowingly withdrew the legal energy that had been directed at it, a court-appointed guardian would have had the authority to freeze my assets, remove my signatory authority over the company, and begin a process of managed asset liquidation. They had done this while Diane was alive, while I was sitting beside her bed, while I was watching my wife leave the world. Robert looked at me across the table. I was aware that my hands were perfectly still. I was aware that my face was giving him nothing. I said, "They vastly underestimated the man they were trying to destroy." Robert picked up his coffee cup. "Yes," he said, "they did." In 43 years of business, I have seen what happens when a man reacts emotionally to a crisis. He telegraphs his position. He gives the other party information about what he values and what he fears. He makes noise when he should be making plans. I learned very early that in business, when you find rot in the foundation, you do not scream at the rot, you do not call the rot names. You locate every compromised beam, you document every crack in the structural integrity, and then you bring in the engineers, the attorneys, and the demolition crew, and you take the whole structure down in a controlled and deliberate fashion. Diane used to say that my ability to stay calm in a crisis was my most terrifying quality. She said it admiringly. She said it was the thing that first made her understand I was serious about building something that would last. I sat in her chair that night after meeting with Robert and looked at the photograph of her I keep on the side table. It was taken on a trip we made to the Amalfi Coast 12 years ago. She is laughing at something I had said, and the light is behind her, and she looks so completely and irreplaceably herself that looking at the photograph is still a physical sensation somewhere below the sternum. "I know," I said to her. "I know exactly what to do." I called Victor Lang the following morning. Victor has been my corporate attorney for 35 years. He is 58 years old, extraordinarily methodical, and possessed of a legal mind that my business competitors have on multiple occasions described as adversarial in a way that should be illegal. He has never lost a case I was personally involved in. When I told him what I had, in the calm, specific language I use when I am most serious, the line went quiet for a long moment. "Harrison," he said, "I'm clearing my calendar." "I thought you might be," I said. Over the following 3 weeks, Victor coordinated with federal prosecutors, wire fraud, pension fund embezzlement, forgery of financial instruments, conspiracy to commit probate fraud. The dossier Robert had compiled was delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2 bound volumes. The forensic accounting firm Victor engaged reconstructed every transaction Nathan had made through the Holloway account, going back 31 months. The total figure, including interest and the pension fund contributions, came to $4,107,000. During this time, I performed. This is the part of the story I take a certain cold pride in. I shuffled. I dimmed the lights in my home office. I kept Diane's photograph prominently displayed on my desk in a position clearly visible from the doorway. I wore older clothes. I moved more slowly when Nathan or Serena were present. I let my hair become slightly unkempt. I asked Nathan, in a voice carefully calibrated to sound uncertain, to explain certain financial documents to me. I watched him explain them with the barely concealed impatience of a man who believes he is already in possession of something that does not yet technically belong to him. Serena had begun redecorating the guest suite. I watched her bring in fabric swatches and hold them against the walls. I said nothing. I shuffled past. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as proprietary, and I filed it away. Cassandra called twice a week. She was warmer than she had been in years. She used the word Dad more frequently than I could recall her using it since childhood. She asked gentle questions about how I was managing. She suggested, gently, that perhaps it would be wise to centralize the estate management, and offered her services, naturally, given her legal expertise and her deep love for me. "That's very thoughtful," I said in my most tired voice. "I'll think about it." I watched the 3 of them grow more confident. I watched their posture change. I watched Nathan begin spending money with the looseness of a man who believes a large inheritance is already secured. He leased a new vehicle, $84,000. Serena ordered furniture for the guest suite, imported Italian pieces, a rosewood credenza, silk curtains. He charged it to a credit account linked to my business address. The federal warrants were obtained on a Tuesday. Victor called me that evening and told me the date had been confirmed. I sat in the quiet house for a long time. Then I walked to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, the same Earl Grey Diane had always bought, the tin still half full in the cabinet, and I drank it standing by the window, looking out at the dark yard, at the bare branches of the oak tree she had planted. "Almost," I said. "I asked them all to come to the house on the following Saturday. I told Nathan I wanted to discuss some estate matters and that I thought we should do it as a family." His voice on the phone had the forced warmth of a man who believes he is managing you. "Of course, Dad," he said. "We'll be there." I want you to notice that he called me Dad. They arrived together, Nathan, Serena, and Cassandra, in Nathan's new leased vehicle, which was silver and gleaming, and sitting in my driveway in a way that communicated an ownership it had not yet formalized. I opened the door in old clothes. I had dimmed the lights. Diane's photo was in its place. I had positioned a chair for myself that was slightly lower than theirs, the kind of seating arrangement that allows other people to believe they have the elevated position. I offered them coffee. Serena declined in the manner of someone who does not drink the coffee in houses they expect to soon own outright. I made it anyway, and held it in both hands in the way of an old man who needs something to hold. I told them I had been thinking about the estate. I told them I had been thinking about the future. I let my voice carry a slight tremor, not enough to be theatrical, just enough to allow them to hear what they wanted to hear. I said I was tired. I said the house felt very large. I said I was thinking about whether I really needed to remain so involved in the day-to-day of the company. I watched Serena's eyes change. I watched her look at Nathan. Nathan looked at the table. I looked at my son then, looked at him directly, and held the look for long enough that he should have understood it as what it was, an invitation, a door held open. I was asking him, in the only language I had left to use, to choose correctly, to look at his father and say something true. He looked away. He looked down at the table, and he looked away, and something that had been very slightly open in me for the past several weeks closed with a quiet finality that I have not revisited since. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said, "let me get some papers from the study." I walked down the hallway. I did not go to the study. I opened the front door. Victor Lang walked in first. He was wearing a charcoal suit, and he was carrying a briefcase, and behind him came two men and a woman in suits I recognized as federal agents. I had met the lead agent, a man named Torres, 2 weeks prior in Victor's office. Behind them came two more agents, and behind those agents came a forensic accountant named Priya Mehta, who worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office and who was carrying a document box. I heard Serena say, "What is this?" and the sound of a chair being pushed back. I walked back into the dining room, and I stood in the doorway. Victor set his briefcase on the table. He opened it. He removed a series of documents in clear plastic sleeves, and he set them down with the precise, unhurried movements of a man who has been planning this for a very long time and sees no reason to rush the ending. "Nathan Caldwell," Agent Torres said, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement of a pension fund, and conspiracy to commit probate fraud." He said it in the flat, declarative tone of a man describing a weather condition. "Serena Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and for your role as the registered principal of Holloway Precision Consultants, LLC. I want you to tell you about the sound of handcuffs. People imagine it as a dramatic sound, a loud metallic snap. It is not. It is a series of small, quiet, mechanical clicks, one after another, and it is the most businesslike sound in the world. There is nothing dramatic about it. That is what makes it so absolute. Serena was screaming by the time they had the cuffs on Nathan, not screaming in the way of someone frightened, screaming in the way of someone who has been caught and who is attempting, through volume and velocity of accusation, to renegotiate a position that is no longer available for negotiation. She said it was all Nathan's idea. She said she had no knowledge of the accounts. She said that if they would just let her explain. Nathan was perfectly silent. He looked at me across the room with an expression I do not have words for. I held his gaze. Then Cassandra was standing, and her face had a quality I had never seen on it before. It was the face of someone watching the bridge they had been about to cross collapse into the water. Victor slid a second set of documents across the table. He described in measured legal language the petition for guardianship evaluation that had been filed in the probate court, the falsified medical reports, the forged physician letter, the specific case number and filing date. He noted that the filing date was 14 days before Diane's death. He noted that Cassandra's bar card number appeared on the petition documents. This constitutes fraud upon the court and subornation of perjury, among other matters that the State Bar Disciplinary Board will be reviewing in detail, Victor said mildly. Cassandra sat down, very slowly. She sat down in a chair in her father's dining room, and she looked at the table, and she did not say another word. Priya Mehta opened her document box and removed a certified accounting of the recovered funds, $2,417,000 from the operating account, $1,690,000 from the pension fund, total $4,107,000, plus interest and penalties. "Everything is recovered," Victor said to me quietly, "every dollar." The agents began moving Nathan and Serena toward the hallway. Serena was still talking, the words becoming less coherent, more desperate, the language of someone who has never encountered a situation in which there was no exit available. Nathan went quietly. He had gone very pale. He did not look at me again. The last thing I heard Serena say before the front door closed behind them was Nathan's name, screamed at him with a concentrated fury that would have stripped paint. The alliance, as such as it had been, was dissolving in real time at the end of my driveway, in front of a silver leased vehicle that would be repossessed within the week. My daughter, Cassandra, sat at the table for a long time after they were gone. Victor had left her with copies of the relevant documents and the information she would need for her contact with the State Bar. Eventually, she looked up at me. I was standing in the doorway. I want to be fair to her and say that what I saw in her face at that moment was not calculation. It was something more genuine, something that might have been grief, if grief is what you feel when you understand clearly for the first time who you have chosen to become. "Dad," she began, "I'll ask Victor to recommend a defense attorney. Good ones are expensive. I imagine you'll need to reach out to your firm contacts." I walked back to Diane's chair. I sat down. I folded my hands. The house was very quiet. It was the right kind of quiet. Nathan Caldwell was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The sentencing guidelines for pension fund embezzlement are not gentle, and Victor had ensured that every aggravating factor was clearly before the court. Serena received 9 years. Her cooperation with prosecutors, such as it was, warranted a modest reduction. She had offered, with extraordinary enthusiasm, to testify against Nathan regarding the scope and origination of the scheme. He received no such consideration, having chosen to say nothing. Holloway Precision Consultants, LLC, was dissolved. Its registered assets, a modest sum, as the majority of the embezzled funds had been converted to personal expenditures on property, vehicles, furniture, and clothing, were subject to full forfeiture. The silver-leased vehicle was repossessed 17 days after the arrest. The Italian rosewood credenza was removed from the guest suite and consigned to auction. It sold for $4,200. Cassandra did not go to prison. What she lost instead was her law license, suspended for 18 months pending a full disciplinary review, with reinstatement conditions that will occupy her for several years.
The petition she had filed with the probate court was stricken from the record. I was told she has moved to a smaller city to begin again, which is perhaps the most useful thing that could have happened to her, if she has the character to use it.
The $4,107,000, every penny of it was returned to the company. $1,690,000 of it went directly back into the employee pension fund, which I had the full accounting firm recertify and resecure with additional legal protections. I called a meeting of all 187 employees covered by that plan. I stood in the warehouse because it was the largest space we had, and I told them what had happened, and I told them that their retirement was safe, and that it had always been safe, and that as long as I was alive, it would remain safe. There were people in that room who had worked for me for 20 years. There were people who had come to Diane's funeral. There was a man named Gerald who had been with me since the first year, who was planning to retire in 18 months, and who was 67 years old and had tears on his face that he did not try to hide. I was not calm in that moment. I want to be honest with you. I was not calm. I dismissed the 4 senior managers Nathan had hired during his tenure, brought in from outside, loyal to him rather than to the company's culture and values. I reinstated the 3 department heads he had reassigned to reduce their authority. I promoted Claudia Reyes, who had been with Caldwell Precision for 16 years and who Nathan had systematically excluded from every meaningful decision-making process, to Chief Operating Officer. Then I created the Diane Caldwell Foundation. 50% of my personal net worth, an amount that Victor and my estate planning attorney formalized at $17,400,000, went into the Diane Caldwell Foundation, which is dedicated to adult literacy programs, early childhood education funding, and vocational scholarship for first-generation tradespeople. The scholarship is called the Harrison and Diane Caldwell Skilled Trades Award. Every year it sends 8 young people to apprenticeship programs they could not otherwise afford. Every year I read the thank you letters they send. I read them in the wingback chair with the worn patches that hold memory. The other 50% I transferred in a structured gift over 5 years to an employee stock ownership plan. 187 employees are now partial owners of the company they helped build. I told them at a second meeting that this was not generosity, it was accuracy. It was simply recognizing what was already true. I took my first vacation in 11 years. I flew to Sardinia on a Thursday. The flight was long. I slept for most of it, which I had not expected. I woke up somewhere over the Atlantic as the cabin lights were dimmed and the other passengers were sleeping around me, and I held the small photograph I carry in my jacket pocket, Diane on the Amalfi Coast, laughing at something I had said, the light behind her, and I thought about 45 years. I thought about what she had said, about calm, about how nervous people make mistakes. I thought about how she had been right. The hotel in Sardinia had a terrace that looked out over water that was an extraordinary shade of blue, the kind of blue that seems almost intentionally beautiful, as if the world is making an argument. I sat on that terrace on the first evening with a glass of wine, and I watched the sun go down over the Mediterranean, and I said a few things to Diane that I will keep between the two of us. I will tell you only this: I thanked her. Family, I have learned, is not a biological category. It is not the accident of shared parents or the legal formality of a marriage certificate. Family is what is proven by conduct over time, under pressure, when the stakes are real and the easy path is available and the person nevertheless chooses to remain. Family is defined by absolute loyalty. A lone wolf may lose his mate, but he never loses his teeth.